joining us today. We're going to give it a few moments to give everyone a chance to log in.
Okay, it looks like we have a few folks rolling in here. I think we'll just give it another minute until we have a few more in. My name is Jane Hauser. I am the Director of Marketing and Outreach here at NESCA, and I'd like to introduce you to Tabitha Monahan, one of our transition specialists here. And thank you so much for joining us today for Connecting Transition Assessment to Career Development, which is part of our Fall 2021 Educator Professional Development Series. So thank you for joining us. This will be an interactive webinar, so we will have the opportunity for Q&A at the end. There will be a few polls throughout the presentation, and feel free to raise your hand. That functionality should be at the bottom of your screens, and we can unmute you and you can ask questions or answer questions along the way. So with that, I will turn things over to Tabitha.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and just get started. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am a certified rehabilitation counselor by training, and so that's a lot of working with people with disabilities to help them reach their optimum level of independence. And a lot of that and most of what rehabilitation counselors do relate to the pre-employment skills and helping people get to the employment. So today we're going to talk about how to take the transition assessment, that piece we discussed last week or a few weeks ago, and how to actually turn that into career development activities. And we're just going to start off with a poll to see who we have joining us today. And I'll give it a few moments for people to answer. And it seems like we have a mix of individuals today, including some parents and some people who didn't fit the other categories. If anybody selected other and you feel comfortable sharing your role or why you chose to participate in this webinar today, we'd love to see it in the chat. Okay. And just for the sake of time and to get to the good stuff, we are going to move on, but I love to see that there is a variety of folks here today. And so we'll see here that we have some teachers, some parents. We have students who are looking to get into special education. And so thank you all so much for coming. And so when we're looking at transition assessment and our agenda today, we're going to review and define what transition assessment is. how to use transition assessment to build self-awareness, and with that building, how that relates to career development, using transition assessment to actually build employment skills, and then some career exploration and development resources. All right, so transition assessment, and those of you that are in the field or who were at the first webinar in our series, this should be familiar to you. But an age-appropriate transition assessment is one that discerns a student's goals and gains us the information to understand the strengths and the challenges and needs, the preference, the interests, and measure their current level of performance. And so to summarize that up, it's the ongoing process of collecting information and data about those areas as they relate to the demands of their current and future working, education, living, personal, and social environments. So transition assessment is everything in life. It's not just where are they going to college, or, okay, what kind of job can they do once they're out of public schools? And so what should transition assessment include? Ideally, it's going to have a transition planning and inventory, so something that gets all of the areas of transition. It's both formal and informal measures. It needs to say what support is needed. Is somebody able to do this completely independently? Do they need one-on-one support, something in between? And ideally, we are also going to get situational assessments. How are they actually using the skills? So a lot of times, on paper or in hypothetical situations, students have all the answers, but they're not able to apply it. They don't have the adaptive capacity. So we need to look at that so we can find strategies to help them. And we need that baseline data. We need to know where their performance currently is. And it should include all environments. So we need a self-report. We need a school report for how they're doing in school. And we need to see where the parents say they are at home, because the person that we see in school is very likely a different person than who the parents see at home. And so looking into transition assessments, a lot of times the first thing people think of, especially when we're thinking career development, is interest inventories. And so we're going to head off to our first activity. And if any of you are familiar with Jamboard, this is a great resource on Google, which will allow us to be able to go back to it. So the resources that we come up with as a group today will be available for you all to view later. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the link into the chat. And head on over to the Jamboard. So what are people's, and we have some teachers and some teacher assistants here. So what are some of people's favorite interest inventories, and how do you decide which ones to use? And I will go ahead and start us off with my favorite. Oh, that didn't work. And my favorite is the ONET interest inventory. And so what I like most about the ONET interest profiler is that, one, it's free. So it's accessible to everybody, whether they're working in a school, whether they're at home. It's a self-rated measure, so you don't need any special training to do this. And it goes based on the Holland code. So basically that's a common way to break up different careers into categories. So realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. And so for those of you who may be less familiar with Jamboard, if you are at this link on your web browser, if you go to the sticky note, it opens up that sticky note. Oh, and it looks like there's only access to view. Well, let me see if I can find the right link. Thank you for letting us know that. Okay. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen while I find that link for you. And actually the same link should still work. If somebody's in there, if you can check and see if you are able to write on that, even if you don't have an interest inventory. Oh, excellent, that worked. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen again. Now that we've worked out that bug, you can tell it's my first time using a interest inventory, or I'm sorry, a Jamboard on a live webinar. So thinking about interest inventories, it doesn't have to be a formal one like ONET or maybe some of the ones you've seen in your school programs where there's a specific way to score it. So I'm going to give it another few moments to give everybody a chance to answer. Okay, and so while people, if you're still thinking about it, that's fine. We can always go back and check and see what other people have mentioned. And so we will be doing another job board. So another thing that I find particularly challenging is a lot of times students answer to the question of what do you want to be when I grow up, or what's your vision is I don't know. So how do we support those students who just don't know? And when we're creating their IEP or we're getting ready for that IEP meeting, what can we say? Because yes, we may sometimes get the student that knows exactly what they want to do. They've wanted to work with cars since they were old enough to play with their Matchbox. They know what they want to go to college for, or maybe they even know what they want their major to be. But a lot of times it is that I don't know, or I'm not sure, or I'm thinking about. And so when we're thinking about these students, sometimes it's easier to start with what they don't want. And building in those preferences. So does the student do anything for fun? Do they enjoy animals? Do they love cooking? Are they a person that likes to spend time alone or with others? Do they like to have an active job running around? Is their favorite class English, or is it one of the electives? Do they consider themselves to be a strong human being? Do they like all that lifting? And so that can help us start that conversation and start to think about. I know when I've scored some interest inventories, we'll see the areas of interest are so limited, but they are really good at saying, no, I have no interest in this whatsoever. And so that's a great place to start with supporting students who may not know yet. And so when we're thinking about students and getting them ready for career preparation, it's important that we're building their self-awareness skills. And so what do I mean by that? It's the knowledge of both the strengths and the challenges. And, you know, learning about what they enjoy and what they prefer is just the start. So how can we help them understand their strengths and their challenges in a way that's going to engage them in positive growth? So the first step is they need to review and be supported in understanding their assessment results. And I mean all their assessment results, not just their transition activities. Telling them what their preference code is on an interest inventory, or how good they are with financial literacy or travel training, is only a small piece of the puzzle. They need to know what their neuropsychological evaluation and academic achievement testing set is. If a student's been told they've had growth every year in their math skills and they're doing a really great job and they're working so hard, they may get to high school or college without realizing math is one of their hardest subjects and they struggle with it so bad. And they may not know if they are at or below grade level, and that really affects their employment opportunities. And so it's also important for them to understand why they need to know this. And I think this is a piece where we as parents and educators can bring this up to the team so we're all on the same page. If we know our strengths, we know what tasks or jobs we'll excel at. If we know their current level support, both the ones that they're really good at and the ones that are super challenging for them, that tells us where they are and where we want to build, right? If a student's able to do something 100% accurately, but they need a one-to-one to do that, that's not something that will be able to continue in post-secondary life, especially in competitive employment, but even with day services. It's very rare to get a one-to-one, and most of the times that is not in a community-based setting. Additionally, if you don't know what is a challenge for you, you don't know what accommodations you need. You don't know what you should ask for. And you can't figure out what you're going to need outside of the school setting if you don't know what's happening inside the school setting. And one of the biggest challenges students have when they exit public education is it's literally different laws that determine accommodations. And so students go from the IDEA, Special Education Law, to the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And so learning what accommodations they can take with them is important, and knowing what they're doing at school that's a modification, because modifications aren't going to happen in a college setting and are limitedly going to happen and are more of a job carving situation when we're thinking employment. And so now we're going to head on to our second poll. And so what percentage of your students are aware of their disabilities or diagnoses? What percentage of students are aware of their accommodations? And what percentage of students are aware of the level of staff support they receive? Now, I know we do have some parents and some educators in training on there, so I did put a not applicable option for those who may not have more than one student they're worrying about. But if there are any parents in the audience that feel like sharing in the chat, it would be great if you know what your child's awareness of these things are. And right now it does seem like the parents are the ones that are answering this poll. So we're going to give it a few more moments for the educators and the other service providers to have an opportunity. And it looks like for the educators, about 50 to 75% of their students are aware of their accommodations, the level of staff support they receive, and awareness of their disabilities and diagnoses. And so that is great. Everything we can do to help expand that. And again, that might be an area where we have to have conversations with the parents, especially if the individual is under the age of 18 or under guardianship. It's incredibly important that the student has awareness of who they are as a human being, and working with the family to determine a developmentally appropriate way to share that information, and for them to be able to understand and share that with others that they'll work with in the future is incredibly important. And so we're going straight into Zoom poll number 3. And so before we get started on employment goals, do any of you have any students or children or people that you work closely with that have these really incredible career goals, such as a sports star, maybe working in movie or TV, really wanting to be in the music industry? Or I know the one I get a lot is everybody loves watching people play their favorite games on YouTube or Twitch, and they want to do that too and be an influencer. Right, and so I'll give it another few moments for anybody else to add in their answers. And it looks like about 50% of the, we have about everybody has somebody they know that wants to be an influencer of some sort, and about half have somebody that wants to be in the acting profession. So anyone who has worked with me or been on presentations with me before knows I love goal setting and I love SMART goals. And so when we're thinking about SMART goals in employment, it's really about making sure attainable makes sense. And this is why it is so important that self-awareness is the start. Right now, that once we know their interests and their preferences, it is essential for the individual to be aware of who they are when they're starting serious career exploration process. It's one thing when you're in elementary school and you're still learning and exploring, but once we start really getting into high school and post-high school programs, it's probably time to consider what accommodations are going to make things possible and having that reality testing. So similar to the example I gave earlier about the student who may have below grade level math skills, that student wants to be an engineer and they have dyscalculia. How are you going to tell them that if no one else has made that comment and connection to them before? And so, letting them know, hey, math is really hard for you. You don't really like math. And then bringing that to that exploration phase is, let's take a look at what engineers actually do and how much math they need to use. And sometimes in like the YouTube videos and things like that, and when you're exploring it, you don't actually see that. And so then you have to take it to the next level and say, okay, cool, this still looks interesting to you. To be an engineer, you need what kind of degree? Okay, let's take a look at that course catalog and help them discover that, ooh, you know what? I have to take a lot of calculus classes and I'm having trouble in algebra right now. And ideally, they're coming to that conclusion themselves with support. But if they say, okay, so I need to work on math more, that's again where we bring the IEP team together and say, okay, you want to make progress towards this goal. Here's the things we need to do. And that's again where we get that attainable piece in the SMART goals is, okay, that's a long-term goal. What's that first small goal? We have a great question that I am going to pause and answer live. It's if I've ever had issues with parents who don't want me as the professional to be honest with the student about their abilities. And the answer is absolutely yes. It is heartbreaking for parents to say, you can't do this, right? They have thought and spent their child's entire lives making sure they get the supports and services they need, and so they can continue growing. And it can be heart-wrenching once we get to the point of saying, okay, but they want to be an engineer or an astronaut. And how do we make that happen? One of the big things that I find even harder is if a parent hasn't been discussing the child's diagnoses and medical conditions with the child. A lot of times when I'm testing students, one of the questions I ask is, do you have any medical conditions, learning challenges, disabilities? And I use all sorts of language so to see where the student comes in and what they think. And I get I'd say probably about 50 to 75%, the student is able to list at least one of their conditions or challenges. But there's another probably about 25% where I'll ask, hey, do you have any learning difficulties? Or do you know why you're on an IEP? Or do you have autism? And they'll straight up just say, no, I have nothing. I had one person say, oh, does diabetes count? And it's like, absolutely, yes, it does. And then the conversation goes to, oh, well, how do you think that affects you? What does that relate to you? And the other thing when we're talking about attainable is what do we do for the student who is actually super talented in their, they're fabulous at singing or playing an instrument, or they are in fact a really great athlete and they're on a lot of teams and they've competitively participated. And I've had several cases in the last couple of years where it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. And that's where some of the resources we're going to talk about a little bit later will really come in, is we have to do that reality testing piece of, how many people who play high school football end up playing college football, end up in the NFL. Okay, so that's a really small percentage. So what else? What's some backup plans? Same kind of thing if somebody wants to be in the music business, is having that conversation and doing that research on, what kind of jobs do people do while they're waiting to get discovered, and reminding them that, especially when you get to the elite level, it's not only skill and talent, but it's also luck and who you know. and, letting them know the reality of that. And a lot of times that could work, saying, okay, you're going to work towards being a full-time influencer. What are you going to do for money while you wait for your following to be enough for that to be full-time? But for the people where that really isn't going to work, that, they're like, no, I can do it. They have that much faith and awesome belief in their self. And that is so great almost everywhere, except for when their career goal doesn't really mix with the realistic piece of career planning. And so when I do that, and ideally I'll do that in a small group setting, is I call it, and I tell them right up front, is I say, hey, this is our break your heart lesson. And, and letting them know we've spent so much time working and discovering our strengths, preparing for these next steps. Now we need to talk about the challenges. And I have the students, we brainstorm together and put on the whiteboard. They tell me all the different reasons I should not be a professional basketball player. And one thing that you all definitely can't see with me sitting down is I'm 5'2" in heels. Right. So that right off the bat, super easy, visible way puts me at a huge disadvantage for playing basketball. And I find that conversations like that is a great icebreaker to start the thought process. And this is something that with most of our students, we need repetitive opportunities. We need scaffolding. So we can't let this wait until they're 17 years old or 21 years old, because they need to process and figure out what's next. And we owe it to them to give them that opportunity. It is a huge disservice to our students if we don't have these open, honest conversations with them. And so the earlier we can appropriately start that, the better. All right, so thinking about how does the rest of the transition assessment tie into career development, right? So in the earlier slides where we were talking about transition assessment, I mentioned independent living skills. I mentioned, functional skills, adaptive skills. And so how do we use those results to build into career development and career exploration? Bottom line is building independent living skills builds employment skills. So thinking of basic things of, can you clean your kitchen? Well, now you have some skills that you can relate to cleaning a restaurant. Are you able to fold and put away your laundry? Well, there's quite a few careers that, especially entry-level careers, where you can use that, whether it's working in a hotel laundry room or working in a retail store. These are all things that multitask, right? You can use them for both categories. Same thing with cooking. If you're a cook and you can cook some basic meals and follow a recipe, well, now you're more prepared to work in a restaurant. And boom, we now know you can safely prepare food if you're home by yourself or you want to try something new. What about counting money? All right, so much, especially now, of our finances is either a card or even, touch or, wireless and online payment. But we still need people to know how to count change and money, because who hasn't been at a register and the person or you working the register put in $20 change instead of $20 received instead of 10. Well, now your change is wrong. And so knowing these skills will help keep them employed and help them be prepared for those unknown situations. And of course, building executive functioning and problem-solving skills are essential for every single job. I don't care whether you're the CEO or it's your first day at a coffee shop. You need to have some problem-solving skills. And executive functioning isn't just for academics. We use that in our everyday lives too. All right, so when we're thinking about career exploration, I kind of break it down into 4 kind of big categories and kind of stages. Is we have the research stage, informational interviews, job shadowing, and work-based learning internships. And while these all could go in a order, you know, you may go from researching to job shadowing, back to researching to work-based learning. Maybe you're starting at work-based learning so you know where you can begin to research. And it's important, especially for the individual who may not know what they want to do or may have too many ideas of what they want to do. Doing a lot of these activities will help them through that. And so for research, I already talked about ONET with their interest profiler, but they also have a lot of great information about different careers. So you take your code that you get from the ONET interest profiler and it'll give you, you can put that code in and it'll give you a list of jobs, and it will tell you, you know, the education, the finances, the kind of skills you'll do, the kind of activities that people may do every day. Do they have to talk to a lot of people? Are you using a lot of math? Do you have to email a lot? And the job training level is. And so that is a great starting point to get those basic facts. One of the benefits that I think, you know, silver linings with the pandemic is there's even more job exploration videos on YouTube now than there were before the pandemic. And there's some great ones to really check out. And that can give somebody kind of a visual of what kind of work tasks might be and what does it mean to be a baker in a bakery versus being a baker in your own personal kitchen. And then another one that I really like, especially for the students who have a very specific career in mind, that may not be popular or may be very popular, but you know, that elite 1% type career, is the Occupational Outlook Handbook. So that's actually a government, it's handbook. It's online. It is updated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You put in a job and it tells you whether or not there'll be growth or not and how much growth you should expect. And so the Mass CIS is a great website. It has a lot of career opportunities and more exploration tools. So you can learn about different jobs, but it also gives some neat activities to prioritize your values and prioritize your interests, and then gives you a list of careers to then research based on that. So it's kind of a little more interactive way of doing some of the activities you do on ONET. And so informational interviewing is basically, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's when an individual contacts somebody already in the industry, already working in that profession, and they ask them questions to get to learn more about it. A lot of colleges actually recommend their seniors do informational interviews to learn more about the careers they're looking into going into and the companies they're going into. And so one of the things that we need to do when working with students, especially at the beginning stages of the informational interview and career exploration process, is help them come up with a list of questions they should ask and be prepared. So I'm going to pause here. Please feel free to put some potential informational interview questions in the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you. You know, what are some questions you wish you had looked into before taking a recent job or going into your current career? Or even better, if you've switched careers, what information did you wish you knew beforehand? So one interview question that might be beneficial for folks is, the basic one. What was your education? Oh, yep. What was your education like? And how much school do you need to go into? That is a fabulous question. And, because some people like the idea of, thinking about somebody who may want to be a doctor or nurse practitioner. It sounds great. They love the idea of the work, but maybe they don't want 7 to 10 more years of school after high school. Great question. I think also, what made you decide to go into that field? And how did you go about finding your current opportunity? What is your typical day like? What is your favorite part of the job? And again, more importantly, because sometimes the things we don't want tell us more than the things we do, what part of your job do you like the least? Oh, I love this one. How does this work make you happy or fulfilled? So another thing I talk a lot with my career counseling clients is work motivation and what is going to give you that job satisfaction. So that's a wonderful, fabulous question. And so job shadowing is it's like the step up from informational interviewing. Is you actually spend, a few hours or maybe even a few days shadowing a person who does that job, so you can really see what it's like in the whole course of the day, because if you ask any one of us what we do all day, I guarantee we're running around so much that a lot of the little details that are just automatic to us now would be less automatic when we first started out, and maybe the things that make or break the difference. And so work-based learning or internships, volunteering, is some of the greatest ways to get, especially those essential entry-level job preparation skills and those necessary like work ethic, attitude, learning how that all works in real life. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the bit.ly link back into the chat. And I want us to head on over to Jamboard. The second page is, I'd like us to see how we are, or how your providers or your students' providers are handling the work-based learning opportunities that are so important for our folks with the pandemic. So some schools have been incredibly unique and thinking out of the box when it comes to all of these pieces. Job shadowing is, frankly, I think it's really hard to do in a lot of school settings because it usually takes knowing somebody in that field, and it does take a lot of gumption and know how to get one on yourself. But there was one school last year where one of their volunteers, their places they had volunteered in, they found a way for them to do the work in the school building and just have either staff from that business or staff from the school bring the supplies and drop them back off. And I thought that was a great way to deal with an incredibly tough situation. Because again, of course, when we're thinking inclusion, especially in an 18 to 22 program, inclusion is community-based. It is competitive employment, things like that. So the best we can do to get them there is important. And so gonna give that a few moments. And I'll share, there'll be an email going out at the end of this presentation or sometime in the next couple of days with the PowerPoints, and also a link for just some feedback on the presentation and other topics you might want to see. I'll be sure to include the link to the Jamboard. So if people think of anything later, please go ahead and write it on the Jamboard to see, so that we can continue to share this resource. And so at this point, we are almost out of time. So I wanted to open up for the next 10 minutes. If anybody had any questions, anything they weren't so sure about and would like covered.
We have a couple here. I know you talked a little bit about interest inventories and preferences and things like that. Do you have any specific insight or guidance on which are best to work for certain situations or certain students?
Absolutely, great question. So when you're looking at all the different tools available, and each district and each company, each organization is going to have their own combination of tools available. What I like to look for is making sure the skill level and developmental level matches where that student is. You know, the student that's heading off to college, please don't give them a picture-based interest inventory. And same kind of thing, if somebody uses a augmentative communication device, make sure it's compatible, right? So that they're either able to use their preferred communication style. So if they prefer to use visuals or and respond with gestural, like pointing, have it be in a way for that. It's also important, I think, if you have someone who isn't a strong reader, that doesn't mean they necessarily need a picture-based interest inventory, right? Developmentally and their vocabulary knowledge, maybe they are able to answer the other interest inventories, but they just may need you to read with them, or they may need to ask what a specific job means. I'm forgetting which inventory it is, but I had a student within the last couple weeks ask what job was using a calculator, and then having to have the conversation of, oh no, this is just tasks that may happen in a job. So does this give you joy or not is what you're answering. Or if you really don't care, that's what like that neutral middle number might be. And the other piece that I think is helpful is going back to the purpose of the assessment and why you're doing the interest inventory. There are some that help match potential jobs to skills a person has. And that can help there, especially if you have a student who maybe they've had a couple part-time jobs or they've done a lot of work-based learning. And so now they want to figure out what's next.
Great. And are there specific transition assessment measures that are particularly important for career development?
So, of course, I think most people, and I think I've mentioned that, is, you know, we think of the interest inventories as like, that's the vocational assessment, but we need to also make sure we're checking into soft skills, because that will make or break a person's success more than whether or not they can do the job. If they can't do the job, we can either provide support or accommodations, or we can get them into a better fit. But if they don't have the executive functioning skills to get to work on time, or they have trouble navigating boss-employee relations or coworker relations, that is going to be continually challenging unless we deal with it sooner rather than later. So we have a great question in the chat. It's, do you find it hard to find employers who are willing to set up internships, and how do you go about reaching out to companies? So I think this is really one of the most difficult aspects of being a transition specialist. We all go into the field because we love helping students and we all want to help them get to their goals and skill level. This is more about selling yourself and selling the student. And so opportunities may include, again, it's a lot about who you know, reaching out to long-term relationships that you've had, especially if you're working in a school system. Small businesses tend to be a little bit more willing to do some internships because there's less liability issues and concerns. And also they have less policy. They may not have policies against it. The other great thing to do is go find your local nonprofits, because a lot of nonprofits already have mechanisms in place for volunteers. And we have a parent question too. How many interest inventories do you recommend for a high school students on IEP as part of transition assessment? So, and how often should they have a transition assessment? So I'm going to answer the second part of that question first. And basically, transition assessments should be an ongoing process. Now, you may have more of a formal transition assessment written down all in one place during your 3-year reevaluation. However, it's meant to be from beginning to end type process. So there should be ongoing activities to help continue to see where their skill levels are. And so we can then build on those skills. And so it's important that any of those activities end up in the key evaluations or current performance pieces of the IEP. So a perfect example is a student who attends the guidance counseling seminars, who may be in a fully inclusive general education setting or only have some pullouts. If they're attending the guidance counselor seminars and they're set up with programs like Naviance or SCORE, I think is the other big one, then they're doing a lot of these transition and interest inventories already. So if we can pull that information and make sure it gets into the IEP, then we don't need to have the students redo things. So when we're in that kind of situation where we're continually keeping track and marking that information and know where they are, I think it's completely fine that maybe only doing it during a formal one during a 3-year reevaluation. I definitely would prefer, and again, in my kind of perfect world, is a 8th grade sophomore. Let's get that baseline. We're going to know those skills are going to be super low because they should be. The person's 14 years old. I don't think any of us knew how to drive at 14, at least not legally. And same kind of things with knowing how to pay bills. I don't know many 14-year-olds that know how to pay bills. But let's get that baseline skill level and let's see where their self-awareness skills are. And then we can, when we do the next 3-year evaluation or in either their sophomore or junior year, whenever it comes up next, then we can see how much growth they have and what things we really need to focus on. And the last piece with the interest inventories is, one's fine. I do sometimes do more than one to see how they match, because if they are pretty different inventories, it's really interesting when if you can connect both to similar scoring platforms when they don't match. And that does happen quite a bit, especially for people who are still pretty early in the exploration process. But really, we only need one. Let's see, I think those are all the questions I see for right now. Jane, do you have more where you are?
I think, oh, one more just came in. Oh, just a thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Just to let you know, I will be sending out an email with a link to the evaluation for this presentation, a PDF of the presentation from today, and then also a link to join us for the third installment of our fall educators professional development web series, post-secondary options. If not college, then what? So Tabitha, I'll turn it over to you, but thank you all for joining us today.
And so post-secondary options will be about a minute or two of some post-secondary options, but we are very lucky at NESCA that next week, it's hard to believe next week is the middle of November already. Next week, 3 admissions counselors from Job Corps from different parts of the state of Massachusetts will be joining us, and they will be sharing information about their program. And Job Corps is one of my favorite resources, so definitely come check that out, especially if you think that a trade or a not four-year college is what's best for your students or your children. And all the links that we talked about, so the Jamboard and the evaluation will go out with the email with the PDFs. Okay. Well, thank you also for joining me at the end of a day during a holiday week, and I look forward to seeing many of you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.